Today we celebrate we commemorate the Last Judgment as we prepare to enter into Lent. And already this week, liturgically, there's already a Lenten aspect to the services. The Triodian kicks in not only for the Sundays of Lent, Saturdays and Sundays, but also for the weekdays. And Wednesday and Friday, liturgically, are fully Lenten days in the liturgical cycle, with at least the hymnography, the tone, the vestments, the prayer of Saint Ephrem with prostrations and all of that. So we're really on the edge. And so the church holds before us two readings. Of course, the reading about the Last Judgment from Matthew. And this will be repeated again during the pre-sanctified liturgies of Holy Week and the Matin service of Holy Week, where this theme of the Last Judgment, as we approach Pascha, which is not just the feast of the resurrection of Jesus 2,000 years ago, but it's the great feast of his second coming and of our entrance into the kingdom. So also, we read this because we're entering into that period of Lent, which is precisely a purification, a time of preparation, a time of transforming and changing our lives, and making a conscious and deliberate effort to stop from sin and to change our habits. One of those habits, of course, is what we eat. And so fasting is prescribed for Lent. There are two aspects of fasting. The one that we usually just observe is that we stop eating meat and animal products during Lent. But if you notice in this reading from the epistle, it's not about meat in and of itself. It's about food that has been offered in sacrifice to idols. And that's the reason for not eating meat. It was food offered in sacrifice to idols, which was the only place you could get meat in the ancient world. You went to the local temple, and they sold off the meat that was sacrificed. And so it's not about meat in and of itself, but it's an effort of purification to cleanse our lives from all of those idolatries which we have engaged in. And what are those? Certainly in our society, one of the greatest of idolatries that we fall into is that of money. Now, we can't live very well in our society without money. We have to work for a living, and working for a living is a good and important thing. But we don't work just for the sake of money. We don't devote our entire life to the pursuit of the almighty dollar. But rather, when we work, what work is, it's an offering of oneself, of one's time, of one's labor, in order to support your family. And what a good and beautiful thing this is. What a beautiful sacrifice this is. That when we work, that work is not just about my ego. It's not about getting rich. It's not about having power. It's not about any of these things. Being able to buy all the latest toys. It's about being able to raise a family. And thus, the work itself becomes holy. But if we're pursuing it for purely selfish reasons, it's not. It's like, It's like eating meat. If you eat it with prayer and with thanksgiving, it's holy. If you eat it simply as a means of self-gratification, it's not. When it talks about fasting, our fasting is not simply about cutting out meat and cutting out animal products. The other type of fasting, and this is very important, is not eating. In the monasteries, they don't serve a meal in the dining room, in the trapeza, from Sunday night until Wednesday after presanctified, which usually means that nobody eats anything unless you have a special blessing. I don't encourage that for lay people living and working in the world. But the ancient pattern of fasting, that's still observed in many places, is to not eat until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or at least skip breakfast, or skip lunch, or something like that. To fast means to abstain completely. And it's not about simply the act of not eating. The fasting is there as a means of teaching ourselves self-denial and saying no to ourselves, so that when something comes up that we really want to do, that we're tempted to do, that we know is sinful, we are practiced enough in self-denial to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to fall into this. And we all know what those things are in our lives. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's wanting to tell somebody off. Maybe it's wanting to tell off your boss. Not a good idea. Maybe it's, maybe it's lust. Maybe it's to give in to despondency. Or maybe it's to engage in gossip. Or whatever the temptations are that afflict us, we need to exercise ourselves in saying no. And the word asceticism means exercise. And so the more we exercise and the more we train our will, the more easily we will be able to say no to ourselves when it comes to things that maybe we might like, maybe we do habitually, but that we can cut off that action before we allow ourselves to fall into that sin. And so this whole period of Lent is a period of ascetic exercise. And without asceticism, without self-denial, there's no Christianity. You can have a whole bunch of nice rituals, pick your style. Pick the style of music, whether it's Russian chant or Byzantine chant or Palestrina or rock and roll or whatever. If all Christianity is about going to church, who needs it? Who needs it? That's not what Christianity is. Christianity is an entire way of life of trying to bring ourselves into the living experience of communion with God. That's not just what we do in church, but what we do with the totality of our lives. And not just we do in a religious context, but what we do at home, what we do when we're by ourselves, as well as what we do when we're with friends, with family, co-workers, and all of this. And because that sanctification of our lives touches every aspect of our life. And that purification of our lives from sin, that purification of our lives from self-will, learning how to cut off our self-will and say no to ourselves, is something that will benefit us in every aspect of our life. So as we think about the Last Judgment, and think about what are the real criteria of that judgment. It's not about, did I eat meat on Friday? It's not about, did I finish my prayer roll? It's not about, did I check all of the packages to make sure there's nothing unfasting, even if it's the least little bit of whey on the ingredients list. God will not judge us for those things. Those kinds of disciplines are there for us in order to learn how to say no to ourselves. They're for us in this world to teach us to be careful with our spiritual life and to learn how to say no. But the real criteria of judgment is, how do we treat one another? How do we treat our neighbors? How do we treat those, especially who are poor and in need? Are we generous to them, regardless of who it is? Generous in spirit, generous with our alms. This is the criterion of our judgment. Let us strive to live according to that criterion, learning how to cut off our own selfishness, so that we in turn might be generous to those in need, and to thus manifest the love of God.